All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to Round on the Go. This is a seminar series that my office, the Applied Research Institute, puts on in collaboration with the UVA Foundation. So thanks so much for coming out. Before I introduce our speaker today, I just want to let you know to keep an eye out for 2 more seminars that will be coming in the spring semester. We'll have someone from the Center for Politics talking about civility and how to talk to people you don't agree with, and which is something we all have to deal with day to day. And then we're also going to hear, there's a new book of a professor in the history department called The Cigarette, Political History, which is a fascinating book, and so we're going to bring that speaker to the series in the spring, so keep an eye out for those 2. Today I would like to welcome our speaker, Lana Schwartz. Lana is an assistant professor in the Media Studies Department at the University of Virginia, and she is the co-editor of Pay, Dongles, Checks, and Other Money Stuff from MIT Press. And she is also the author of New Money, How Payment Became Social Media, which is what she's going to talk about today. And that book is forthcoming in the spring, so keep an eye out for that from Yale University Press. Lana was previously a postdoctoral research at the Social Media Collective at Microsoft Research New England, and a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. She completed her PhD at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism and an SM in Comparative Media Studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So thank you so much for coming, and please welcome
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I've sort of geared this talk for a sort of general audience, so tried to make it fun, accessible, interesting, provocative. But if there's any deeper dives you want to do on any of the more academic lenses, I'm happy to do so. And today I'm going to talk about one slice from my research on the intersection of money and social media and the way technology is changing the way we do money. And that is getting paid, right? Normally, when we think about the politics of money, we think about who has it and who doesn't, right? How much we have, how it gets distributed. But I like to, because I'm a communication and media studies scholar, I pay attention to the information infrastructures of money. And I argue, and will demonstrate in this talk, that not being able to get paid is just as important as not having money. You can get paid $15 an hour, but if you can't access that $15 an hour, if the information systems that transmit it to you are broken, you're as good as not having any money at all. So that's the slice I'm going to pull out and talk through. So I'd like to open with this video that was issued by a small business called Facebook that you may have heard of, that was issued earlier this year, announcing the launch of their Libra payment cryptocurrency, alleged cryptocurrency system.
Remember when these were fast? And these? Technology has improved the world around us. So why is it simple to send one of these anywhere in an instant, but not money?
Bartering to shell, to gold, to money.
What if we made money truly global, stable, and secure? What if everyone was invited to the global economy with access to the same financial opportunities? Introducing Libra, a new global currency designed for the digital world, backed by the belief that money should be fast for Ope in Lagos, simple for Saul's family business in Manila, and secure for Betsabe when sending money home to Mexico City. It's powered by blockchain, making it safe and accessible, no matter who you are or where you're from. So join us as we move towards a world where money works for everyone. This is Libra, and it's just the beginning.
So when this video came out, I was sort of shocked. as a critic of technology and a scholar of technology, I'm used to being in sort of a critical mode when it comes to companies like Facebook. I'm used to thinking, oh my gosh, they're doing the exact wrong thing. This is terrible, catastrophizing, and then calling up all my friends who are in the same scholarly world as me and getting really upset. But the thing that sort of intrigued me about this is that Facebook, much to my surprise, was arguing some of the same things I have been arguing for a long time. That we need money that moves at the pace of our larger communicative world. That if we expect to be able to text someone or send them an email or FaceTime with someone down the hall or on the other side of the world in an instant, we need to be able to send and receive money at the same scope and scale. Facebook was arguing that money should be as simple, secure, and safe and fast as all other forms of our communication. And I couldn't help but agree. Nevertheless, I have come to discover and argue that I don't think Facebook is going to do any better than at accomplishing these goals that I think are some of the most important fundamental goals, getting paid and paying at the speed and scale of our communicative worlds than other social media companies have been. So in order to dig deeper into this and see sort of what has gone wrong with social media payments, I'd like to kind of show a case study. So in 2014, a young woman named Eden Alexander had a severe reaction to a common medication. She was covered in blisters, and as she put it, her skin was peeling off like paint. Dismissed by urgent care workers and referred to first a dermatologist and then a psychiatrist, she soon developed a secondary MRSA infection, and by the time the hospital admitted her, she was in a coma. During her recovery, she and her friends set up a crowdfunding campaign using GiveForward, which is a platform specifically designed to raise money for medical costs. Suddenly, though, Eden found that her WePay account, or her GiveForward account had been canceled and all donations had been refunded. So at that point, she had raised thousands of dollars and all of them had been refunded, and she got this email saying, unfortunately, it's come to our attention that you've acted in violation of our payments processor, WePay's terms of service. WePay's terms state that you will not accept payments or use the service in connection with pornographic items. Therefore, the system has flagged your account and canceled its gifts. What happened? What went wrong? So as it turns out, Eden Alexander's job is to be a porn actress, a cam girl. And one of her friends, also working in the same industry, had offered a free pic set, so pornographic materials, to anyone who donated $100 or more to her Kickstarter, or to her, rather, GiveForward. Then Eden saw this offer, retweeted it, so she retweeted the person who was offering the pornography, and suddenly, payment for her crowdfunding campaign for medical expenses became a payment for porn in the eyes of WePay, the underlying payments processor serving the crowdfunding platform. So, we all read terms of service every single time we sign up for everything. We all know that that's something we really pay attention to, right? You guys do that, don't you? No? Okay. So as it turns out, adult or adult-related services, including escort services or other adult entertainment services, adult entertainment content, including performers or cam girls, are prohibited by WePay. And WePay had found out that she had done this because one of its main added values is a machine learning system that surveils all relevant social media for quote-unquote high-risk behavior. So it is as they put it, a patented risk engine that leverages social data and better technology to create a seamless user experience to help them underwrite small businesses and individuals with greater confidence. So unbeknownst to her, she had been caught in the dragnet and found to be in violation. Now, this is somewhat ironic because WePay had made its name as the anti-PayPal during the Occupy Wall Street protests. Occupy Wall Street was known to kind of freeze some accounts that Occupy Wall Streeters were using for fundraising. And WePay came in and said, you know what, we're the anti-PayPal. We won't freeze your accounts ever. We will allow the free flow of money to anyone. And they even trolled the PayPal Developers Conference by dropping off a giant block of ice full of $5 bills that said, PayPal freezes your money, unfreeze your accounts now. And also, to add just a little bit extra irony, the kind of origin story of WePay as a startup was that some friends were organizing a bachelor party and couldn't figure out a good way to split up the expenses, and therefore had this idea to come up with WePay. And I'm sure there was no adult entertainment occurring at that bachelor party. So despite all of this, all of the technical details underlying this, the reality was fairly stark for Eden. She wrote, WePay is refusing me to give me any of my medical expense donations because I'm a porn star. My account is empty. The world wants me to die. And what this underscores to me as a communication and media studies scholar who's interested in money is that money and payment is communication. It is the transportation of information from one place to another, from one count to another. But money is uniquely information that is socially guaranteed to be valuable. It is therefore it is the information that allows you to provide operating expenses for businesses or a family or an individual, to keep the heat on, to have enough to eat, to pay your rent, to pay your medical bills. Getting paid or not getting paid is an act of communication that can mean life or death. So that is why I was sort of excited and sort of invigorated and kind of had this kind of surge of optimism when I saw that Facebook was arguing that we need a money form that does what Libra says it's going to do, that moves at the speed of the scale of the internet and works for everyone. But so far, social media hasn't done a very good job. Here's a collection of famous account freezes, perhaps less dire than being able to pay your medical bills. But there's a numerous accounts of people paying for a Cuban sandwich with Venmo. So someone pays you for this has happened to you?
Yes.
So I'd love to say more.
I just came back from Miami. This exact thing happened to me.
So you paid your friend back for a Cuban sandwich.
Cuban sandwich.
And you
asked me to qualify the transaction, provide details where I went, and the services that were, because they wrote in the comment Cubano.
Right.
Yes.
So what you may have gotten was a boilerplate like this one that says that you've fallen afoul with something related to the Department of Treasury's Office for Foreign Asset Control. And can you please explain what your reference is, elaborate the nature of it? This version wasn't for a Cuban sandwich, it was for someone who just used the word Ahmed in a Venmo caption. Like their friend was named Ahmed and they were paying them back and they just wrote Ahmed in the caption, and somehow that ran afoul of their detection system. Previously, someone with PayPal had used a donate button that PayPal allowed them, and as they were kind of corresponding with PayPal's, and then their account got frozen, they were corresponding with PayPal's terms of service or customer service, and it said only a nonprofit can use a donate button. They said that's false. It says right in the PDF instructions the donate button can be used for worthy causes. I haven't seen that PDF. What you're doing is not a worthy cause, it's charity. What's the difference? You can use a donate button to raise money for a sick cat, but not poor people. So it was like that, like raising money for gifts for kids, which is what they were trying to do, didn't count as a worthy cause under their very strangely defined terms of service. But again, regardless of these small details, this is, as one person told me, the system is always the same as always. The system has detected something unusual, so they closed it for security reasons, and it will take days, if not weeks, to reopen it. It feels and looks like most end users like a black box. And the mechanisms for recourse, for getting it reopened, are equally opaque and at very best case scenario, quite lengthy. So what happened with Eden Alexander exactly? So GiveForward, the crowdfunding platform, they blamed WePay, so their underlying payments processor's terms of service. WePay said that while they were extremely empathetic and her hardship was unfathomable, they blamed the rules around payment processing that were limiting them and causing them to make tough choices. So they blamed their obligations under bank contracts, Visa, MasterCard. So this kind of passing the buck. The public, so Eden had many, many followers. She's a well-known person. They decided that this was an example of institutionalized misogyny, or of what many of them called horophobia, so like a fear of sex workers. They saw that this was just endemic to Silicon Valley bro culture. But to me, none of these hot takes, the kind of passing the buck or blaming Silicon Valley bro culture, really explain what went wrong. And neither of these takes really explain what went wrong in the case of a Cuban sandwich or in the case of a Venmo caption for Ahmed. So I'd like to kind of spend a little bit of time looking more deeply at these infrastructures to see if we can trace out what the problem is. And in doing so, I will argue that for people, individual people, getting paid electronically is still a challenge. And neither legacy nor fintech systems do a good job for everyone all of the time. So let's first talk about the problems with legacy electronic payments, meaning basically the card networks. And the main problem here is that people can't use them. Simply put, there is no real mechanism for people to be able to accept a credit card payment without going through some kind of platform. And the reason for this is because the card networks were imagined in an era where in the 1950s and 60s, which I've written through the 70s, which I've written a lot about, and I'd be happy to geek out about the history of the Visa MasterCard network if you'd like. But they were imagined for a world of producers and consumers, of merchants, vendors, and then people who bought them, who bought stuff and patronized them. They were not imagined for kind of the peer-to-peer internet-based world we live in. So there are basically two kinds of banks that are able to access the network, the card network. The issuers, so this is like your bank card issuer. I have a Chase Sapphire. Chase is my issuer. And the acquirers, the banks, the merchant service banks that offer, receive payments on behalf of the merchants. As an individual person, there is no way for me to partner with an acquiring bank to allow me to receive payments and access the card network. It is prohibited by card network rules. There is no real way for them to build a package for me to do that. So simply put, I can't access it. There's no way for me to do so without going through some kind of intermediary. So beginning in the 90s with PayPal, a variety of services have been envisioned to try to close that loop, to try to figure out a way to allow people to access the card network. And almost all of these are platforms with very similar business models. And we're going to talk through some of the issues with that. So first, they are run like social media startups. And this means that they are one size fits all. And they are entirely based on governed by terms of service. So when I sign up for Facebook or I sign up for Square or Venmo or PayPal, I'm not getting to work out a unique terms of service and rules that sort of apply only to me. Everyone is beholden to the same rules, and there is no kind of bespoke relationship that you can enter into. And that means that so in order to understand the problem with that, we have to go back and look at the legacy payment system and the way that it was set up. So I mentioned that there are two kinds of banks. This is where it gets a little complicated, and I'd be happy to do more in Q&A to break this down more if it's all confusing. I teach a whole class where we really get into this stuff. But basically, the way it works is that, let's say I want, so the acquirers don't just acquire payments on behalf of the merchants they service, they also hold the risk for payments. And what that means in payments is that if an end user, if a person who bought something wants their money back from a merchant, then they ask their issuer for their money back. So if I buy something and it's fraudulent, I buy some diet pills and I don't like the results, I'll go to my issuer and say, I want my money back for that. Then the issuer goes to the card network goes to the acquirer, and the acquirer goes to the merchant. So the issuer gives me my money back right away. The acquirer gives the issuer that money back right away. And then the acquirer has to find and track down their merchant in order to recoup the money that they've given to the issuer and the issuer has given to me. So that means that if the merchant truly is fly-by-night, if they've gone out of business, if they're sketchy for whatever reason, the entity in this system left holding the bag is the acquirer. So that means that there are certain categories of company that are known to be high risk in the banking services world. This is a list produced by the FDIC about 10 years ago, but it's pretty much hasn't changed since, that says, these kinds of companies, pornography, Ponzi schemes, surveillance equipment, home-based charities, get-rich-quick products, etc., these tend to be risky. People tend to want their money back, and we have a hard time, and acquirers tend to have a hard time tracking them down to get their money back. So if you want to do business with any of these companies as an acquirer, you should charge more for the payments. So they often say in the payments industry that risk pays. It's really good, and you can make a lot of money as an acquirer partnering with these kinds of companies as long as you charge them enough money to outweigh any chargebacks and any risk of people wanting their money back that may arise. So typically, a high-risk merchant, someone, a psychic, diet pills, home-based charities, will partner with a high-risk acquirer, which will allow them to access the card network. Any merchant, no matter how risky, can find an acquirer who's willing to take payments on their behalf as long as they're willing to pay for it. And of course, pornography is on the list of these high-risk services. Can anybody think about why? Like, why might pornography be considered high risk for chargebacks? People tend to want their money back. Yeah.
Well, people can just deny it and basically say, oh, I didn't buy that.
Exactly. There's a massive amount of what people in the card industry call friendly fraud, or it wasn't me fraud, where people do make the purchase, but then their spouse, their employer, their parents see this on the bill, and they wind up demanding a refund. Also, because of the very nature of it, the porn industry has historically been sort of sketchy. They have this tendency to sign people up for subscriptions they didn't want. They're often, bound up with some various other kinds of scammers and hackers. So there is some amount of actual fraud. So what that means, but nevertheless, if you're a porn seller, you'll have no problem finding an acquirer as long as you're willing to pay a little bit more per swipe. But what happens when a list of high-risk services that was intended to create a market for risk, a market for pricing payments, gets packaged into a one-size-fits-all terms of service-based system? The things that were considered, risky, but as long as you can pay for it, no problem, get prohibited entirely. So what was once a list to guide a market becomes a list that prohibits certain kinds of activities. And we agree to the terms of service simply by clicking a button, oftentimes without any access to reading it at all. The next issue that compounds this is that the platform, the underlying payment platform, the platform that the underlying payment system supplies is the client, not anyone on either end of the transaction. So in the case of the crowdfunding, Eden Alexander and her funders, her backers, people who are donating to her money, were not the clients of WePay. Instead, the client of WePay was the crowdfunding platform itself. When you and I pay for things using Braintree, which is the underlying payment platforms of Uber, you and I and the driver of Uber is not the client. Instead, Uber is the client. When we buy things on eBay using PayPal, we're not really the client of PayPal. eBay is the client. So in the traditional payments network, your issuer is you're the client of your issuer, and a merchant is the client of their acquirer. But in this case, we are nobody's client. The individuals on either end are nobody's client, and which makes it very difficult to motivate proper customer service when these kinds of issues arise. So you get these, again, kind of form emails that just say things like, "Hi, Chuck, your account has been frozen. Please contact us if you have any questions or want to reactivate your account." The end. It's frozen without any real notice or any real sense of recourse. So you get websites that essentially function like customer service, like third-party customer service portals, such as screwpaypal.com. This middle finger is a native artifact. I am simply a scholar. Or paypalsucks.org, or various Facebook groups where people just get together to try to figure out how the heck they can get access to their money and they can get their account unfrozen. And as one interviewee told me, that of a platform payment system, it's like a bank with the customer service of Facebook. Worst of both worlds. Third, the primary value proposition here is data and analytics, not stable payments. So WePay was not interesting to its funders because they did a really good job of providing payment services. They were interested to their venture capital funders because their underlying machine learning patented risk engine was an interesting new piece of technology. And this example of this false positive of Eden Alexander being caught in the dragnet, or our Cuban sandwiches being caught in the dragnet, isn't really a bug. It's more of evidence of the way a machine learns. So this is like a real world experiment going on, and maybe in the future they'll be optimized and better developed to try to figure out how to separate, actual fraud from things that just look like fraud. But the only way that a system can learn that is by using real data and sort of experimenting as they unfold. So what makes these systems function and what makes them interesting and valuable is exactly what makes people who use them vulnerable. And for a company like WePay, the vision of success is continued venture funding or eventual acquisition, not long-term sustainability. And so, recently, WePay was actually acquired by Chase. So they have been successful. The founders have exited. They can have all the bachelor parties they want, and it can be a lot more expensive than they have been in the past. So, the challenge still remains. Silicon Valley has been trying to figure out how to do payments for people for over a decade now. And if we count PayPal, since the 90s. And if you're Eden Alexander, so, she is famous. She has an army of Twitter followers ready to raise a ruckus when her account gets frozen. And actually, CrowdTilt, another crowdfunding platform that is now defunct but was trying to get its name out there, stepped in and said, "Eden, we're so sorry to hear about your plight. We'll start a new crowdfunding campaign for you, and don't worry, technically pornography is against our terms of service too, but as long as you just don't retweet anybody, it'll be fine. We'll go ahead and do it." Good luck if you don't have an army of followers who are ready to raise a ruckus when you fall afoul of terms of service. And in general, the problem remains specifically for sex workers. So while I was tweeting about this and writing about this, someone contacted me and said they were trying to put together a conference for women who were currently involved in the sex industry and who were trying to exit it. And they kept trying to figure out how to accept donations for this conference, and their accounts kept getting frozen. And they said, is there any system we can use where we can, most importantly, guarantee that it will be stable? guarantee that we won't, everything, we will do our best to follow the terms of service, but can you help us figure out something that won't suddenly fall apart at the last minute? And I said, not really. There's checks, there's cash, but in terms of receiving payments and being able to access your money with 100% guarantee of stability while doing something with the word sex work in the title, I cannot guarantee you. And this issue, so the issue of getting paid and getting paid with some amount of predictable stability is true not just for sex workers, but for example, while I was writing about this, one of my students was throwing a gala for the Turkish Student Association at the University of Virginia. They were using Venmo to gather donations, and suddenly, at the moment when this student was supposed to pay the caterer, his account got frozen. It got unfrozen, but not in time to pay the caterer on the night that the caterer was expected it. And no one is really sure why the account got frozen. The system detected an irregularity, and within 2 weeks it was fine, but the instability itself created an issue. And it was true for an antiques dealer I interviewed who does kind of like auctions, like he buys, he's like Storage Wars, like he buys these whole lots and then resells them. So he gets in like tons of money all at once. And so that unto itself, the very kind of like practice of not having any payments and then having like a ton of payments triggered an irregularity in Square. And suddenly, that which was associated with high-risk activity, and suddenly his account was frozen. And as he said, my initial thought was, I'm done. This is going to be the end of me. So one moment of instability, of payment instability, one example of not being able to get paid at the right time can mean life or death for a business or a person. So in 1963, the head of the Diners Club Network, the first kind of universal third-party payment system, or the first charge card, said, cash may die soon everywhere because it simply can't keep up with the fast-moving world. Cash simply hasn't become modern in 1963. And it was true then that suddenly people were moving much faster and further than their money could, that suddenly people's communicative worlds were moving at a pace that their payment infrastructures couldn't keep up with, and it's true now. And even despite all advances in payment, we have not yet figured out how to do that, how to actually make money that keeps up with the fast-moving world. So can Facebook's experiment do any better? I'm going to argue no. And that's for a couple of reasons. First, Libra isn't really a cryptocurrency. So, cryptocurrencies are defined by being undergirded by a decentralized blockchain system with no single point of failure and no kind of third party. And it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, Libra doesn't exist yet. All we have is white papers and some code repositories that they've issued to go on. But it doesn't seem to use a blockchain in the traditional sense, and doesn't seem to be truly decentralized in the way that we've imagined that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to be. Instead, it's more of a closed loop system for moving money around. It's more like if I took my $5, turned it into, like the kinds of tokens you can use at a fair, and then used it at that fair, and then the merchant who I'm, the ride operator, then took those tokens and then cashed them out and turned them into dollars. So it creates this kind of this closed loop world of basically Facebook credits. And it seems to me that the kind of blockchain logic or the blockchain rhetoric is kind of just to make it sound cool. And so what makes Libra, though, have potential? The fact that Facebook is truly a worldwide universal address book, that everybody in the world has an account, everybody in the world is at the fair, And so I can easily say, send Libra to my mom who's living, on the other side in the Philippines. She's not really, but if she were. And then it could just be credited to her Facebook account without relying on these external infrastructures. The very thing that makes it have potential to circumvent the kinds of problems that traditional or fintech systems have had with handling the risk is the thing that makes people who use it more vulnerable to problems. And that is, we don't have a good mechanism for holding a company of Facebook size accountable. They may not be beholden to the same terms of service or to the same issues of holding risk that traditional fintechs are, because they're keeping it inside their closed loop. But if they're keeping it inside their closed loop, that means that they get to make all of the rules. And if we're moving money in and out of Libra, so if I have to turn my dollars into Libras and then turn my Libras into dollars, I'm going to have to use the same traditional systems that Square and WePay and all of these other fintechs use. And because we don't know anything about Libra yet, because it doesn't exist, all we can do is look to the way Facebook has historically settled problems when we imagine how it might make and enforce its own rules. And to have a sense of that, I recently interviewed a woman who owns a yoga studio. And she as part of an event, she decided to have a doctor come in and talk about CBD. So she wasn't selling CBD oils, which aren't even illegal. She wasn't she wasn't selling it. She was actually, the doctor was actually someone who was very skeptical of CBD, but she posted a bunch of Facebook ads in connection with this event to try to get it out to her clients that she was going to have this event. Instantly, within hours of posting her Facebook ad, she got a notification from Square that said, "We understand that you have been selling marijuana-related goods, and your account has been frozen, effective immediately, and 3 pending payments that she had coming in have been frozen and will be returned to the client. Unless you sign an affidavit right now, within 24 hours, that says you will cease and desist any marijuana-related activities, and you will never sell anything marijuana-related again." And she got really mad. She was like, "I'm not even selling marijuana stuff. This has nothing to do with what I'm doing." She felt ashamed, like she was being accused, and for something she wasn't even doing. But she was like, "You know what, fine, it's not worth it. I need my money." Again, payment is the key here. And so she just signed the thing, sent it off, left it at that. And then she went into her Facebook and was like, "Well, this has been a bad day, but let me at least raise awareness about this thing." And she got the notification that said that her ad services account had been disabled and that she was permanently banned. So in this case, she was the perfect example of someone who had faced this payment instability on the one hand with Square, and then was able to actually resolve it more quickly and with more clarity than she had been with Facebook. So if we're thinking about imagining, as my my one informant put it, the worst of both worlds, a bank with the customer service of Facebook, now imagine that it just is Facebook the bank. And we have very little, I have a hard time imagining that they'll be able to overcome the existing just kind of normative problems that are endemic to Silicon Valley payments, nor radically improve their own business model. And I discuss this and more in my book, which is available in pre-order from Yale University Press. It's called New Money. And my edited collection with MIT Press, which has been out for a couple of years. And I invite you to take a look. And thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer questions.
No idea. It's not bad, but go ahead, ask questions.
Sure.
Whenever you say that Facebook is not using blockchain, you're saying that because it's not a traditional blockchain, right? Whereas I would assume, and of course we don't know, that they're big enough with enough different servers in different parts of the world where they've hit that point where they can have their own blockchain internally.
So, okay, so
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, so the question is, I said that Facebook doesn't really use a blockchain, and the question or the suggestion was likely they use a blockchain of some kind, but not a traditional one because it's not decentralized.
It's not audited externally.
It's not audited, right? So in blockchain world, we tend to think about permissioned blockchains and non-permissioned blockchains. So like the first kind of blockchain, the traditional Bitcoin blockchain is totally open. Anyone who wants to host that blockchain can just run the Bitcoin client and host a node on the blockchain themselves. So it's truly decentralized. Well, that's the idea. I'll talk more about that in a second. And anyone who wants to join up can join up. And in that way, there's like no central point of control. It's, imagine if every single one of us were just like running a little bit of computation in the background of our computer, and then that computation is hosting the blockchain, and it's this publicly surveyable database for everyone to see. That's the idea of a traditional blockchain. A permissioned blockchain is kind of a closed blockchain. So it's instead of saying, I don't want to have something that anyone can see, that anyone can participate in, instead, let's say I'm JP Morgan and I want to run some kind of blockchain that only me and the top 5 investment banks are going to run. And we are going to be equal partners and kind of supplying the computation to host this shared ledger. And no one of us gets to control it, but we're creating this shared platform upon which to compete. That's open and decentralized, but among us. So it seems as though Libra is going to be more like a permission blockchain, but from what I've seen, and again, it doesn't even really exist, it isn't even that. Like, it really seems to not do the basic components of a blockchain, which is mining and proof of work and the kind of like hash functions that the kind of the technological features that blockchains are known for. It seems like it's really just like kind of a internal database. The one thing I will say about the kind of traditional blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, is that it actually in practice isn't that decentralized. What has happened is that when you host the blockchain, you are incentivized and given a Bitcoin for your work. And so what has happened is that has become increasingly centralized. So mostly in China, big companies have developed like big, massive industrial server farms to host the blockchain. And that has increased difficulty for the kind of computation required and made it so that an ordinary person would not be able to contribute to the blockchain in any real way. I know this is like somewhat technical and complicated, but there actually, there's some good, I'm actually in a Netflix Cryptocurrency Explained video. If you want to check that out, it kind of explains it in more detail. But in reality, the most imagined to be decentralized blockchain, which is Bitcoin, has become totally centralized and is actually run by as many as 5 and as few as 1. It's hard to tell because like Chinese companies tend not to have the best transparency. And so in fact, it is in fact perhaps more centralized than the traditional system. But it doesn't seem like Bitcoin's or that Libra has any of the transparency measures or any of the decentralization or any of the technical features of a traditional blockchain. And blockchain experts are split based on what Facebook has actually published and what code they've made available, but it doesn't seem that recognizable to most people who are invested in the idea of a blockchain. And it doesn't seem like blockchain could provide any of the kind of social safeguards that we imagine that it would. Yeah, we can talk more about it, but yeah.
That's technically, it seemed like most of the
problems that you pointed out, the real life examples had to do with clumsy AI. And I'm just wondering if...
It's clumsy AI, but AI is only as good as your data and what you tell it to do, you know? And so it's the instructions that these companies are giving the AI is to prohibit risky activity. But the theory of risk is based in a vision in which you should have to pay more for your risky activity, right? So like if you're a psychic and you have a tendency for your psychic visions to be wrong, so people want their money back, then you're going to wind up partnering with a high-risk ISO or high-risk acquirer. And so I think there is potential for AI to be developed to develop some kind of dynamic pricing model, but I don't know how to resolve the two different risk models. One that is looking to prohibit anything that has been defined as risky. That's the new kind of Silicon Valley version. And then the old one that says you have to pay more in case you wind up incurring a bunch of chargebacks. So there is kind of potential here, but I think that it's not just a question of building better training data. It's a question of reimagining how we can develop AI systems that account for dynamic risk and price payments accordingly. I mean, it's the kind of dark secret, or like the risk pays model, is that most of the time, even high-risk merchants don't incur a bunch of chargebacks. So most of the time, people don't want their money back for pornography. Most of the time, people don't want their money back for psychics. But those high-risk industries pay more anyway, because that's the going system in payments. So in order for a platform payments company to figure out how to do this using AI, they'd have to also wind up getting a guarantee from a traditional banking institution to underwrite their payment services, and be willing to kind of go along for the ride in reimagining everything we already know about risk. If that, makes sense. Yeah.
So if, let's say I took all my money that I get in my paycheck and I put it into Venmo, and then I live my life in Venmo, I do everything in Venmo. Why does Venmo care what I'm doing there? So that's only ruled by terms and conditions. Yeah. What is it? Only because at some point I might push it back out into the acquisition risk thing?
Because in kind of the tech industry way of doing things, the goal is almost entirely scale. So we want to try to get as many people as possible to be able to use Venmo. And in order to get as many people as possible to use Venmo, there's this kind of one-size-fits-all terms of service. And then that one-size-fits-all terms of service has to be backed by a one-size-fits-all acquisition system, which then has to be low risk. So if I'm going to say everyone's in it, and I'm going to get the kind of scale I need to be considered a valuable property in the Valley, then I have to make sure that everyone can use it. And the only way to make sure that everyone can use it is to say I'm not allowing any risky deals. So it can't be like, well, this is our platform, this is our system that we use for risky people, this is our system that we use for not risky people. It's just this kind of blanket approach.
So it's not even just the AI, it's the culture of Silicon Valley that is preventing them from building a business that makes sense.
I mean, there's only as far as I can tell, there are only a few real models of success, and that is winner takes all, so you become Facebook. Acquisition, you get bought by Facebook, and then half the time Facebook closes you down and you stop doing the thing that you built. Or just like continued funding and then pivot into doing something else. So what is required, I think, is to develop is to change the culture of the business side to imagine more niche platforms that get to continue doing what they're doing. So with like that aren't just the Facebook of payments, that are kind of parallel streams that can interoperate with each other. And that's something that's, again and again, I meet people in my kind of research in this space, and they're saying, like, I really want to do this cool thing, but it's impossible for me to get funding unless I'm explaining how I'm going to become the Facebook of, or I'm going to get acquired by the Facebook of. Yeah, one and then two, yeah.
This may be a bigger question than you want to answer, but I'm thinking about what are the disadvantages of allowing money to be freely exchanged without intermediaries and regulation. Yeah, that's an interesting thought, considering how we now try to regulate and why.
Yes, it's very tricky. And this is kind of the trade-off between like privacy and security, for example. Cash is an amazing technology because it's anti-surveillant and it's free-flowing. Like you can give anyone cash for anything, but you don't get your money back if what you bought is fraudulent. And all kinds of tax evasion, money laundering, illegal activity flourishes in this environment. But at the same time, the ability to pay and be paid with some amount of privacy and stability is kind of a cornerstone to a free society. So it's like this kind of really tricky balance. And actually since the 80s, technologists, kind of people who sit at the intersection of technology and activism have been imagining how to create a digital cash, which is anti-surveillant and doesn't allow for any kinds of chargebacks and can be used for anything, and for the most part have been unsuccessful. So, but yeah, it's a complicated trade-off, and that's a larger question of how to best serve the public good. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like most recently there was some pullout of some of the bigger companies
Yeah.
in the association. Do you have any comments on maybe, is it purely political or is there sort of tech risk that they?
I think that the launch of Libra has been really poorly handled, and they sort of were like, we're going to do this, and they sort of were daring the regulators to regulate them and sort of say, like, we're Facebook and we are global, and even if the US is unwilling to, or tries to regulate us, we're actually targeting like the global south and the remittance market first. So, and those people fall outside the remit of US regulators. And I think their gambit to just like do it first and then figure out the details later in terms of like the regulatory structure didn't work very well, and they didn't really bother getting a lot of the details ironed out. And I think that it just became not really worth it for most of the partners to continue to participate. And I mean, I've heard people who shall remain anonymous, who work for the big payment intermediaries, who felt like the Facebook, once they actually got into the nitty gritty of what Libra would be, it was kind of amateur hour, and they just didn't have faith it was actually going to function, like as a technology, or as and according to a compliance, and they felt like it was going to be just a reputational hazard to continue to be part of it. I think Facebook is trying to figure out how to do money for 10 years or more. Like they've had various payment services built in to Messenger and et cetera, and it's going to happen eventually. But I'm not sure what's going to happen with Libra. I was kind of excited also because Libra was going to come out right when my book came out, and I was like, yay, I'm going to get to be interviewed by whatever, but we'll see what happens. So.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So you mentioned two cases where people, they freeze their accounts. One of them for the lady who has a yoga studio because they thought she's involved in selling marijuana.
Yeah. Because of CBD oil.
Yeah, and the other case was for some people they relate to sex or whatever's case. So what about the cases where it's legal to sell marijuana in like Colorado, for example, or they have legalized sex things like Switzerland or Thailand? Are you still able to use the electronic?
Right. So ironically, this woman who had the yoga studio was like, literally the next day after she finally got her accounts open, she saw a headline that said Square is pioneering medical marijuana and CBD payments with select merchants in certain places. And so she was like, how do I become part of this? And she found that it was only kind of like large scale merchants in certain places that they were willing to partner with, and she wasn't able to make the cut. So it seems like there is, and for the most part, these systems tend to disallow risky transactions regardless of where you are, unless you are a large-scale major player who they are willing to work out a relationship with and pilot test some special product with. So even though there's kind of this like dream of peer-to-peer, dream of a system where we can all connect directly and it flattens and democratizes the industry and gives everyone, as the Libra video put it, access to the same kinds of systems, it seems to be the case that we're all subject to the same rules, and then big companies who they choose to partner with are subject to different rules.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. That was really.
Thank you.